she was not ready to die. She had a terrific fight to stay alive, and in such became what amounts to a poltergeist, or a recreation of matter in energy form, and existed for a period of time in that form until finally death keeps calling her back.
There's scarier things in carnivals than rigged games and bad prizes, because this week it's Carnival of Souls from 1962, directed by Herc Harvey.
After a traumatic accident, a young woman's life turns into a living nightmare.
In 1962, a little-known industrial filmmaker named Herc Harvey directed a film that would quietly slip into obscurity, only to rise from the dead decades later as a cult classic. Carnival of Souls was made on a shoestring budget, yet it carried an eerie, dreamlike quality that disturbed those who stumbled upon it. Shot in stark black and white with a hypnotic organ score and a ghostly, surreal atmosphere, the film blurred the lines between reality and nightmare. For such a little-known film, it became massively influential on some of the biggest directors in the following decades, like George A. Romero as he came to make Night of the Living Dead. David Lynch said, "I saw Carnival of Souls at a young age, and it never left me. The feeling of unease, the drifting between reality and something else. It's a masterpiece of mood." John Carpenter said he loved Carnival of Souls. It had this creeping dread that builds throughout, and the idea of death being inescapable, always lurking, is a huge influence on horror, including my own films. Even modern-day filmmakers like James Wan from The Conjuring and Insidious said the concept of inescapable terror, the idea of being haunted by something you don't understand. This movie does it in such a simple yet effective way. That's something I always try to capture. You know that annoying corporate speak? Oh, let's put on our logical hat. Let's put on our creative hat when they're discussing shit in meetings. I kind of do that with films. Because I'm such a big film fan, I kind of nearly appreciate any kind of film, from your popcorn, overly stupid, not even ironic sort of 80s cheesy action film to your David Lynch 3-hour art house mindfuck. About 5 minutes in, I was kind of putting on my it's dated but charming in a nostalgic way hat. It's so old and low budget. It's probably not going to capture me like a normal film experience because I'm seeing so many movies, and I'm, born in the modern age when everything's so technical and efficient, and that Beatles thing of they did it first, so unless you were there to see how different it was, it's hard to really tell the difference between them and what anyone else was doing in the 50s. Sometimes you watch a film and it's like, this was the first of its kind, but because it was the first of its kind, it does stuff that you've seen a million times but probably done better, smoother, by more talented but less original directors. And I was prepared to put that hat on to watch this film. Don't get me wrong, there is the clear technical limitations. The kind of dubbing that we love in spaghetti western films was seen throughout. Some of it done very well, some of it with the minor characters done really bad.
All right, now let's hear your story about how it happened.
It wasn't our fault, sir.
Yeah?
We were the first ones on the bridge, and...
Although I'd say it nearly adds to the dreamlike, surreal feel of the movie. The sound effects were pretty much non-existent. There wasn't a lot of Foley work, only for very specific moments that were maybe for a jump scare or a create an atmosphere, but otherwise, it didn't really exist. Some of the setups for shots and the editing was a little bit ropey. So the technical limitations were all there. But I gotta be honest, about 5 or 10 minutes in, after the initial traumatic accident that kicks the movie off, because this film gets right into it, it doesn't mess about. We have a drag race in the opening 5 minutes, and then they're falling off a bridge, and then after a creepy credit sequence, her friends are nowhere to be seen, the car's nowhere to be seen, but she miraculously crawls out of the water and is seemingly saved. But then from that moment onwards, once she's on her road trip across the country to this new job she's got, she's a professional organist and she's going to be playing in this big church in this faraway little town. I took that hat off and I put on a different hat where I was just purely getting into the atmosphere and the experience of the film. As she's driving along the highway at night and you start seeing these images of strange ghoulish men in the road or appearing in her passenger window as she's driving in the night. and she starts getting tortured by these possibly real hauntings, possibly just all in her head, psychological manifestations. I just was really getting into the film and really captivated, and I wouldn't say any jump scare moments got me, but I was disturbed by the film as it went along, and I just couldn't believe how well directed and made and acted for the most part this film is. It's also the first time she notices the alluring old abandoned carnival. He found a location that he could use and then formed a movie around it. Kind of a bit like George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead, a director that he would actually go on to influence, incidentally. The director just knew that he had this amazing set, an interesting setting that he could use, and maybe didn't build the whole film around it, but largely incorporated what would be the significance in the final sequence of the film.
Coming back from Los Angeles, I saw this place, Salt Air, which is located just outside of Salt Lake. It's very Russian Arabesque in architecture, and I saw it at sunset. It was the weirdest looking thing I'd ever seen. So I stopped the car and walked about a half mile to take a look at it. Noticed it was deserted, quite a ways now from the lake because Salt Lake had gone down, and so the lake is sitting, the amusement park is sitting away from the lake. So I came back and talked to John, showed him a couple of the pictures that I took when I was there, and said, it's a great location. We ought to figure out something to do with that.
An abandoned carnival is creepy as shit. Like, you don't even need to really explain that. But also it's funny because it does feel, at certain moments, a little shoehorned in. She's just sort of allured to it for no real reason. When she meets a doctor and starts going to meet with him, he's just like, you're a woman, you've got hysteria, nothing's happening to you, what are you talking about? It's all in your head. Later in the film, he just kind of throws out there, you're fascinated by this carnival. There's something alluring you to it. Why is that? You seem to be attracted to this carnival. He just says it in a way where it's just like, I guess she's going to go to the carnival next scene. And she pretty much does. Probably the only scene I didn't like, because it really just felt like dialogue purely done to make something happen that the screenwriter wanted to happen, rather than good dialogue, which I felt this movie had pretty realistic modern dialogue throughout. I really liked it.
That old pavilion out by the lake, somehow you associate it with all this, don't you?
Let's be real, what you said, you took your little hat off, you turned off your technical view of everything and was like, let me just relax, enjoy this, let me not pick up on little things. And the director, Harold Harvey, he was an industrial filmmaker, he'd done a lot of stuff for companies.
Sort of like nearly like make corporate videos of the time.
Yeah, basically, he went to film school and this was actually his only ever feature film he directed. After this, he went back doing the work for companies. The budget originally, Declan, started off at $17,000 and he got a couple of investors together from his film school and he got it up to $30,000, which at the time isn't a lot, and you can kind of really see that in the film.
And the sum of $13,000 was raised over a weekend, which I thought was really pretty amazing, because in those days, that was a fairly good sum. Although the idea of doing a 35 millimeter feature film for $13,000 cash is a little staggering even then. But we did get the money and decided, yes, we can do it, and started shooting the film.
You know, in this industry, it's kind of like we've tried to get into media. We've done media before. It's, who you know, not what you know half the time. And I guess he just made his money quite easily from that. It was shot over 3 weeks and there was only 6 crew.
That is crazy. I mean, just look at the amount of makeup. You have so many different ghouls at different points in this film. You have so many interesting shots. But you know what? Even as I started to run through that to say it, there's nothing really where I'd look like, wow, how did they do that with the budget? I didn't feel that while watching the film because I was so captivated. One of the things that I came across most being impressed by was the cinematography. Like, it's incredible. But nothing took a crane or a crazy dolly shot. There was no opening sequence of Touch of Evil where it was like, wow, that was elaborate. It was just so clever. Like, there were so many great little interesting, pretty modern and ahead of its time moments. Just throw away things like, there's a moment she's driving past a carnival and she stops to get petrol, gas for the Americans. She asks for a fill up and she's just like, I'm going to a rooming house. Where is it nearby? And he's like, oh yeah, it's right over there. And the camera pans with him and she walks towards where he's going. And the camera pans kind of off him into black. And then the moment we're in black, a door's opening and she's already in the rooming house. And I remember I was watching that and I was like, that is fucking modern. If you saw it in a modern film today, it'd nearly be one of those kind of flashy gimmicks that Guy Ritchie likes to pull out. Kind of unnecessary. If you see a director do that in a film, you think your career path was definitely through music videos. You know what I mean? It's one of those kind of things where it's not really necessary, but seeing it in a film this early, just for the sake of it, and in a way that contributed to the weird, creepy atmosphere and the dreamlike thing where she's moving through space weirdly. And you know the way that happens in dreams where you're sort of just walking down the street, getting on a bus, but then once you step through the bus, you're suddenly just in a house somewhere. That kind of bizarre thing. I was just watching it. I was like, that's so modern and so interesting. Just really good. And I don't think you could give credit to a cinematographer, because if they had 6 people on set, and I'm guessing the director did everything behind the camera.
The director was even like the ghoulish man that was following her around.
I know, he was. Great director and great ghoul as well.
Yeah,
he was menacing, like, considering he had no acting experience prior. He sold me as a ghoul. He was creepy.
None of the actors or actresses you see in the film, apart from Mary, are professional. There was one guy I hated, and you'll probably guess who I'm going to say because you know me quite well. Where she's living, she meets her next door neighbour from across the hall, who's some slimy, snaky alcoholic. He like tries to woo her, comes around her house the next day and is putting whiskey in their coffees. And there was one bit of dialogue I hated, and there was a particular one scene where this snake, slimy guy convinces her to go out to dinner. He starts getting all angry, like, do you not drink? And she's like, well, I don't really drink. Well, I drink and I drink a lot. And I was kind of like, this guy, I hate him.
Now me, I not only drink really, I really drink.
But why is that bad dialogue? I think you're misdiagnosing your feelings that you didn't like this guy as bad dialogue. You're not supposed to like him at that point, I'm guessing, because he is a bit of a slime ball. I gotta be honest, maybe it says more about me. I actually really liked him earlier.
Really?
Yeah, I thought he was kind of alright. Like, he was obviously a bit of a dick, but going back to that dialogue, what's wrong with that line? That's a good line. He's frustrated. You're not supposed to like him. He's clearly a bit of a seedy character. But I also, do you know what? He was a really good character, and I thought he was a good actor. He's an interesting character to introduce, because I nearly thought he was going to be the love interest sort of that 60s films tended to have. But then the very introduction of him, he's kind of looking in and she's in a towel. Again, really well filmed and directed, where he's leering in. It goes to a POV shot of his point of view as he's kind of looking through the crack in the door, because she's like, oh, I'm in a towel, let me just put on my robe before I chat to you, because it's the first time they've met. And he's leering in, sees her put on the robe, and then she does this little shimmy to make the towel drop out the bottom. And honestly, it's one of those things where, you know, they say it was sexier back in the day when you had to hide stuff, as opposed to, like, I don't know, like fucking gangbang porn, which I kind of get. I kind of disagree with, like, full on sex is the best, but like, there was some, like, the way it was filmed, the way it was done, there was something about, like, it shouldn't be sexy on paper. It's a towel dropping. But I couldn't believe it. Like, it was unbelievable. And again, the direction to install that feeling in me, from just knowing how to place the camera and how to cut, and just that moment and that little shimmy and the music that kind of complements it as it happens. Like, I didn't know until after I'd seen the film he'd never made another film again. And I was kind of devastated, because obviously I went straight on his IMDb to check out, like, what else has he done, blah, 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 to kind of learn about him for the episode, but also I wanted to know what else he'd made. And the fact, when I found out he never made anything else, I was heartbroken. But sorry, getting back to the character as well, he was kind of leering on her and clearly was just like, wants to fuck her. So I thought, okay, he's not the love interest. But then, you know, they chat and he comes around the next morning and she's a lot more warm with him and she's chatting to him and, you know, he brings her coffee. And I was thinking, okay, this already is a very ahead of its time, different sort of film. So the fact that he's into sex, or he just wants to fuck her from the get-go, he's making that clear in his flirtatious, kind of slimy lines, but, you know, he's just doing what a dude do. He's not saying it overtly, because who would ever do that, but he's not being dishonest about it. He's like, yeah, I want to fuck you, basically, which is fair enough. And I kind of thought, yeah, maybe, oh, that's interesting. Maybe he will still be the love interest, but this director was very forward thinking and just trying to get on screen how men and women actually interact when they meet each other and potentially gonna fuck.
This morning, you're exactly what I needed.
You're gonna need me in the evening too, you just don't know it yet.
Well, he's not saying it overtly, but he's basically saying it. He's pursuing her like a madman.
As you're supposed to do.
As you're supposed to. If anything, Declan, she's the one being a slight bitch. It's up to her whether she wants to accept the advances, but she's being very cold-shoulderish, isn't she? It looks like she doesn't really like the attention, and even later on when he's had a few drinks, he says, do you even like men?
Well, she's colder than she's warm. But that's why he's such an interesting character to throw in, because once I realised, oh, he's not the love interest either. He's a really interesting dilemma / situation for her, because as she starts to see more visions, more disturbed by these things that are going on, you know, there's one point where she's in a shopping mall and then suddenly all the sound disappears and no one can see her. And it's like she's completely outside of the world and she can't figure it out. At one point she's on the organ and she's playing it in church. Then the sound disappears again, but it's kind of faintly going in and out, almost like a radio that's losing its signal. And she can't control her hands and she's playing and playing and playing and she doesn't know what she played, but the priest stops her and he's like, get out of here, you don't have a soul, you can't be saved, woman. Yeah. Sends her out. She's seeing the ghoulish man / director everywhere she goes, who's like terrorizing her, and no one ever seems to see it or know about it. So as she's becoming more and more a nervous wreck as the film goes on, this guy who's trying to fuck her is the only person who's really spending any time with her, and the only person she can have around at night, even if it means having to go out with him and potentially fuck him, because she doesn't want to be alone. She's genuinely starting to be scared to be alone. It's disturbing watching her on the date when she just really doesn't want to be there. She's on the verge of a mental breakdown. The guy even says it herself. He's like, I don't get you. The other day you were very classy and assertive of how you were turning me down, but now you're like this meek mouse who's saying anything to keep me happy, like, so I don't run off. Like, what's going on? She wants the protection of another person around. So she's putting herself in this awful situation where she doesn't want to be there. He's not the bad guy in it. He's just being led on. But she's not leading him on just to be a bitch. She's leading him on because she's virtually catatonic and terrified. But she's just in this awful situation where she's semi-prostituting herself for safety.
I think the director possibly put these scenes in not as filler, because obviously as the film progresses, she's seeing more and more visions, and you as the viewer are like, is these visions real, or is the real life with the guy going on dates and just general normal life, is that real? And I think those scenes were put in there. If we don't have those scenes and it's just constantly the ghouls, we can quickly decide which is actually happening. When we've got those two different varying things, it's quite a good tool to keep us as the viewer guessing what's really going on in Mary's head. Is this real life where she's going on a date, or are these visions the real? So I really like that it's placed there to give us a sense of normality in a descent.
It's interesting as well on the date that I mean, I didn't expect to talk about this guy character so much, but I do think he was interesting for the plot, interesting for her to put her in a dilemma, but also, again, great writing, because he wasn't one-dimensional. He wasn't evil. He wanted to get some pussy. He was a bit slimy the way he was going about it, but he wasn't mean. He's probably an alcoholic. He works in a warehouse. He's a bit insecure, you know, he feels less than her. He feels like not good enough for her. You know, when he goes up and talks to that piece of shit who's like, let me try and fuck her. He goes back and he knows the date's not going well, so he pretends the guy said, oh, there's a girl that wants to meet him. But he's like, no, I said, don't worry about that. I'm with you. And, you know, he's saying, oh, I could have gone to college, but I just didn't want to.
Yeah, tell me about this girl wanting to meet me. Wanting me to meet her.
What'd you tell him?
I said, how could I? You're my date, you know.
He's kind of slimy, kind of a piece of shit, but also not this one-dimensional cartoon character that he really could have been. In a modern Netflix film, he would have been a one-dimensional cartoon.
No, you're right.
He would have just been like, I want to fuck you. What do you mean you won't fuck me? You're a cunt.
And then they'd be
I'm
going,
leaving.
Consent.
Yeah. And she's like, don't you know consent?
Yeah, don't you know consent? Sometimes you go into these films thinking, you know, that guy was only in a couple of scenes, but it's the power of the direction that we've had a good 5-minute conversation about this guy that isn't a big player in it. So
Hitchcock, who I assume was pretty influential for this film, was very big on that. He was like, I don't care if they get 2-3 lines of dialogue, then you should find a way of telling them something about that person's entire life story. Once the date ends and she's so desperate, she's like, okay, yeah, come back to my room, but she doesn't want to fuck him. Maybe under different circumstances she might have fucked him, because she seemed to actually like him and feel okay after he brought her coffee in the morning that one time. You know, after she shut the door on him, she kind of like leant on the door and did that woman in a movie sort of like, ooh thing. But she's terrified for her life and going crazy, so she's not exactly in the mood for fucking. But he's kind of like crawling around the room, understandably, because she said, yeah, let's go back. But there's a great moment where she's up against the mirror and he leans up onto her and he starts giving her a kiss on the neck, you know, trying to put the moves on her. And when she looks in the mirror, it's the director who's actually kissed. Do you know what? That's funny now, thinking that was a bit of Me Too, really. It's a bit like when Tarantino wrote in a scene in Dusk Till Dawn where he gets to suck on one of Salma Hayek's toes.
Yeah.
director wrote himself in to be kissing up Mary, because Mary's fucking hot.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Stage actress before
really
this.
hot,
Never done a
yeah.
movie before. Beautiful, though. Looks like a starlet. And it's the ghoul kissing her when she looks in the mirror and she freaks out.
Hey, what's the matter with you?
That was a nice little jump scare, but it's the moment after that where he's realised, okay, you're actually batshit crazy. I'm getting out of here. And she screams and she's grabbing her hair and screaming, I don't want to be left alone.
Ben's after me. You gotta stop him. He's after me again.
I'm getting
Now you have to go.
Not me, sister. That's just what I need. Get mixed up with some girl who's off her rocker.
I don't want to be left alone.
I believed her, man. And she starts pushing up furniture up against the walls, and the fucking old biddy who's renting the room to her is like kind of looking upstairs like, what the fuck's going on up there? I was genuinely disturbed for a second by her reaction. I was like, this bitch is legit losing her mind.
Well, you would do if there's some like ghoul creature chasing you around and...
No, you absolutely would do, but in a 1962 film, you wouldn't necessarily believe the acting.
Yeah, I get you. Now, watching this as the viewer, I was trying to work out what is going on. I came up with all different scenarios. When we go to the start of the film, a traumatic accident, the car goes in, all the others are dead. She comes out of the car, she's not wet, by the way, at the start.
No, I thought she was. I thought she was covered in mud.
She wasn't wet at all. So that got me. I'm kind of thinking here, is this reality? Has she had a brain injury or something that we don't see in the hospital? We don't see her in hospital, which was kind of confusing to me. She's just like straight off to play the organ or whatever. Did you have an opinion on why she was seeing these ghouls? Or
yeah, the moment she came out of the water at the start, I was like, you're a ghost. Or,
right, okay.
Or this isn't happening. But then as it went on, you know, it had a dreamlike quality, but it felt pretty grounded. If she had straight away walked out of the water, not seen anyone, be like, where is everyone? The car was right here. And then straight away wandered into the old abandoned carnival, been like, this wasn't here before, what's going on? And it was instantly trippy. Then I would have been like, okay, this is definitely she's dead and it did not happen, or she's unconscious or something. But, you know, it was quite grounded. Like the next scenes directly after that was her chatting to the priest and being like, I don't believe in God, but I've got this job, I'm going to play my organ. And he's like, you know, you just had an accident last week, you got to be careful. So it was very grounded scenes directly following it. Nice little note as well to imply her reclusiveness since the traumatic accident is that she doesn't even visit her parents on the way out of town because she just doesn't seem to want to have contact with anyone. The film gets increasingly dreamlike and nightmarish and surreal, and at first the visions are completely separate to, you know, anyone else. You know, even if it was really there or everyone else could see it, they're never in the room to see it. But then they start to overlap and be there while other people are there. So I was leaning more towards it was all happening in her head. As she really starts to freak out, she goes to see the doctor, but he turns around in his chair and he's the ghoul.
Director.
You could see that from a mile away. Yeah. That wasn't the best jump scare.
Like this.
It was too slow. Again, though, her scream was fantastic. You know, she's running around, the sound keeps disappearing. She's like, oh, a taxi, please. But the taxi guy's like, I don't see you. You're a ghost or something. So he drives off and she's freaking the fuck out. She ends up again. She gets drawn to the carnival and it's these beautiful low light, black and white photography of her running around amongst the wreckage and everything, and she starts to see all these ghouls appear. You know, it's not just the director, it's maybe the lighting man and the crew and the whole, everyone gets in on the thing.
The caterer.
They're dancing around and it's all bizarre and creepy, and she suddenly realizes that the director is dancing with a ghoul version of her, and she's freaking the fuck out, and she's running along the beach because all the ghouls are chasing her. She ends up falling down into the sand. All the ghouls surround her in a nice worm's eye view shot as they all surround her and cover her. It's the kind of shot that George A. Romero would use plenty of times in his Dead films, which I'm sure he got from here because he was a big fan of this film and big influence on him, especially for Night of the Living Dead. As they block out all the light, because there's so many of them crowding onto her, it goes completely black and it cuts to the next day. The priest is there, the doctor's definitely there, and the local policeman. And they're looking along the footprints that she left. So we know she was there, but that's not that weird. But then they find the footprints lead to this one spot in the sand where seemingly she fell, and then there's no footprints again. It's as if she just disappeared. And then we cut back to her old town where finally the divers and the local police have located the car she was in with her friends when they crashed off the bridge, and they drag it out of the water, and sitting in the car, the dead bodies of her two friends and her still in the passenger seat. So what do you think was happening the whole time?
Two theories, and I like one of them better than the other. You know that famous saying, Declan, your life flashes before your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So when the car's dropping, all of this stuff is a sequence that flashes just before her, before death comes.
The old Jacob's Ladder.
The old Jacob's Ladder. You know, this whole film kind of reminds me of, you know, when you're 9 and you do an English thing, at the end you called it right and it was just a dream.
Yeah, and then your teacher goes every week.
Oh, yeah. Or, I like this one better, Declan. Everything we see, the director and the ghoul, is death. He's the Grim Reaper. Now, everything we're seeing, her going around the town, her seeing this guy, her going to the lodgings, is purgatory. The whole town's purgatory. She's running around playing the organ, it's purgatory. And at the end, when she dances with the ghoul and you see the ghoul version of her, it's her going to the other side finally. Purgatory.
So, I think it's both. Or not both, but kind of your theory and kind of not. So, I think she's in purgatory. I think she died the moment she went into that crash. But I also think her soul, untethered from her body, is physically moving through the real world that we inhabit. The living characters, not the ghouls, are really physical beings in the world. She really is staying in that lodging house. She really does get a job and goes to play the organ in that church. She really does have all the conversation she has. She really does touch and physically move all the objects that she moves. She really does all that. And no one realizes that she's actually a soul uninhabited from its body. I'd imagine that her friends maybe are going through the same experience right now, but maybe in a parallel universe or in a way that she doesn't see. Maybe everything branches off into a parallel universe every time a single person dies and they get to inhabit the new world, or maybe it's its own self-contained capture of the world, kind of like Black Mirror, you know, when someone's consciousness gets downloaded and you can make as many copies as you want and put them in different scenarios in AI or virtual reality and fuck with them, but it's still a version of them. Maybe a version of the universe gets ripped out and placed here just for your own personal limbo, but the humans that are continuing to live their lives as normal don't realize they become this spiritual NPCs in this little mini world that's going to play out over the course of a week or so, or however long it takes the person to actually have their soul captured by the ghouls. But yeah, I do think she was physically in the world. I do think those policemen at the end on the beach were investigating and were perplexed because it was as she disappeared, and she was moving through the world and living her life and genuinely confused and not understanding what happened. Or maybe her other friends, it didn't happen to them, and you know, it's an accident that happens every now and then. A person dies and their soul is supposed to naturally go straight to the exit point, but maybe sometimes it just malfunctions and doesn't go to the exit point, wanders off back into the real world reanimated, and the ghouls get a beep on their pager, said, hey ghouls, you gotta go capture this bitch, go look for her, scare her a little bit first for a week, make her go mental, and then capture her and bring her back down.
The basic concept was that, like Poltergeist, the fact that there is the possibility of energy coming out in a three-dimensional form. In this particular case, Mary Henry had never lived in the sense of doing a lot of things or enjoying life. So when she went off the bridge with the other two girls, she was not ready to die. She hadn't lived that much and had a terrific fight to stay alive. And then such became what amounts to a poltergeist, or a recreation of matter in energy form, and existed for a period of time in that form until finally death keeps calling her back and finally at the end gets her back.
Don't you want to join in the things that other people do? Share the experiences of other people?
I don't seem capable of being very close to people.
It's like when, you know, you can go to America and you can, there's those little points where you can stand in 3 states at once. You know, she was halfway in limbo, halfway in the real world. And at times she was more in the real world than not, and everything was normal. And other times she was more in limbo than not, and she couldn't hear anything. No one could see her and the ghouls were chasing her. But the fact that the film leaves it pretty ambiguous is the beauty of it. Not only was it a fun, intense experience for the duration of the film, really well directed, brilliantly acted, especially for a film from this this period. But it was also ambiguous in just the right way where it's still very satisfying, but we can have these endless conversations about what might have been happening and what was not happening.
I mean, I've been pretty clear on films these days, how they push the actual narrative down the viewer's throat, saying it is this, black and white. I love watching something that leaves it ambiguous. I love these conversations we're having. Basically, you thought the same as me, but you just made it slightly better. So
no, I agree with you with the narrative thing as well. Like, it's that dual viewing Netflix philosophy of people will probably be scrolling on their phones, so the dialogue needs to be like the guy from The Room wrote it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just, it's dreadful.
So I just want to talk about a bit about the impact of the film since its release. It wasn't promoted properly because he struggled to get distribution rights and stuff like that. It actually was shown in drive-ins. It was the second half of a double bill. He basically only got royalties for it. To add salt to the wounds, like the publishing company he chose, when he went to cash the check for his royalties, it bounced because the production company had gone out of business.
It was enjoyable. The making process was enjoyable. The distribution process was torture. And in the final analysis, right after the distribution failed, I had a terrific guilt feeling for all the people who had invested money in the film and weren't getting anything back out of it, and never did get anything back out of it. You feel responsible for that, because had Carnival gone at the time, had we received the money that was due us, we could have gotten right back into another production, and then another production, because all you have to do is have 3 or 4 of these, and then the royalties from the films will keep a company like that going.
It did actually have a remake, but apparently it is absolute garbage.
Oh, really? That's a shame.
So I will not be watching that. It's only an hour and 18 minutes long, isn't it, this film? It's not long at all. It's not even 90 minutes.
Yeah, but you know what? It both didn't feel rushed, but it didn't feel like really quick either, but not in a bad way. It was like this slow pace. When she was going to the carnival at the end, you know, okay, this is a very much a end of the movie scene. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But every scene before that felt like not an end of the movie scene. And I knew the duration of the film before I started watching it, so I was like, it's surely got to be ending soon, but not in a bad way. I was just kind of surprised. But as every new scene came that clearly wasn't an end of the movie scene, I was just delighted, because I was like, I could watch this for 4 hours. I was just so into it. It's so well made for a guy that never directed a film before and never directed a film since. I don't care how many corporate videos he made. That can't prepare you to make a film in 1962 for no fucking budget, with virtually no actors. The only real actor you do have has never been in a movie before, and it doesn't always translate. And he manages to make something this atmospheric, this intense, this otherworldly, at times this modern in certain senses. You know, great dialogue throughout, great atmosphere, really clever and imaginative cinematography to get around the fact that they had virtually no budget. Obviously, probably didn't even have a cinematographer. And it's just great. Like, the makeup's great. There's no part of it, other than maybe some of the sound bits at times, some of the editing and some of the cutaways to like a jump scare of ghouls sometimes feels clunky. But other than that, for its era, it's nearly pitch perfect. There's almost nothing you can say that's bad about the film. Even if you said, the score's repetitive and cheap, you know, it's this booming organ score throughout the film, but the musical score actually has a diegetic component, a component that's actually in the film. You know, the organ is central to the film in certain ways. You know, I love when films do this. Leone used to always do this. There's all these amazing wide shots of her playing these giant organs, and it's all creepy. You know, it's an atmospheric sort of foreboding kind of instrument in general anyway.
Unfortunately, as you said, Declan, this will be the only record of a feature film on this director's IMDb, which is sad, but you can see the influence it had. You talk so many times about George Romero. The makeup on the zombies, later on Become Night of the Living Dead. It's clearly had an impact, and if this is to be his only directorial feature, what a film to have. You know, it's a great film, an outstanding film, especially when you factor in the limited budget and that the crew members were only total 6. What a film to make.
You know, it is pretty tragic. The film flopped, so he probably just thought, okay, I tried it, but I failed. No one liked it. It didn't get great critical approval at the time. But the one thing that's nice is that the start of its cult status started in the 80s, and he was still alive long into that, and he would have seen that and at least lived long enough to realize that, no, he did get it right. He made a great film. The public loved it and started really resonating with it. And I'm sure he must have seen the quotes that came out from from some of the best directors of the day, heaping praise on the film, because it's tragic to think he would have spent decades thinking this film was a failure, because it's not. It was a beautiful film.
It has shown on late night TV now in New York and in Los Angeles, and as a result, there are a lot of people who, at that particular time of night, can relax and sort of let themselves get in the mood of Carnival of Souls. And as a result, we have developed sort of a cult following of people who really do like the ideas and do like the way it's presented.
This could have been George A. Romero at any point in his career. This could have been John Carpenter. This could have been fucking any of the greats. Honestly, it could have been Hitchcock. But still, if you're a film fan that loves everything, fucking watch this. You'll love it. If you're into the 50s, 60s aesthetic, you'll love it. If you have any liking of the Twilight Zone from back in the day, this kind of feels like maybe the greatest Twilight Zone episode ever. Would be kind of a good general description of it. Now that we do this show, we watch a lot more movies than I'm used to, and there's an obligation movie every week on top of the movies I want to watch. So I re-watch films less just because I have to fit it in. So there's rarely a new film I'll watch that I think I'm definitely going to re-watch that again soon. But I'm going to watch this film again soon. I really want to. It is pure entertainment on top of all the other compliments I've given it so far. So that is an easy recommendation for Carnival of Souls.